Hey everybody, this is Darin Francis with Harbinger Lane Consulting and Signals in Higher Education podcast. Today I'm joined by Dana Stephenson from Riipen. Welcome, Dana.
Thanks for having me, Darin. Excited to be here.
So, want to talk to you about experiential learning. We've been talking about this together for a long time, so it's going to be a bit of a repeat. But I think that all my conversations, I'm fascinated by the founder's journey. I think you guys have a really interesting starting point. Can you talk about whatever got you interested in work-based learning, experiential learning, and how you started the company?
Well, for those that don't know, probably what you're drawing upon, what makes our story interesting and unique is that, it really starts when we were students. Dave Savory, Jordan L., and I met at the University of Victoria. And Dave and I were actually in the business program. And I'm still going to remember this moment where the light bulb hit us so clearly, where we were going through a normal strategy course in the business program. And our business professor came up in front of the class and took a Harvard Business Review case study, probably on Coca-Cola or a big name like that, and ripped it up in front of the entire class and said, rather than recycling this case study that I do every single year, today we're going to bring in a real CDO. And you're going to be faced with a real problem that the CEO is facing, and you're going to come up with solutions in groups and come back and have an opportunity to present to this CEO, get real feedback, and hopefully have some of your ideas implemented. And I think what was so interesting about that moment when I reflect on it is that the interesting piece was that the original experience from the students, the reaction was almost like a freaking out. Well, wait a minute. How are we going to do this? This isn't a cookie cutter assignment where there's a right or wrong answer. How am I going to get to that A? And that was the point. The faculty member said, well, look, this is going to be a messy problem. There is no right or wrong answer. It's really about how you listen, how you creatively problem solve, how do you hear feedback, how do you iterate, how do you come back with a problem and communicate that, and how do you collaborate together as a team, come back with conviction around your solution, and how do you back that up? And that was just this crazy moment for all of us, because we were thrown into this. Even the students who were, look, I just want to get my piece of paper and move on so I can use this piece of paper to get a job. Well, all of a sudden, super captivated, super engaged in this experience. Many of us were staying up till 3 a.m. trying to prepare for our presentation the next day. And then it was humbling.
All right.
I mean, we all in our little bubble thought we were brilliant. Everything that we were learning from these textbooks was teaching us to be the world's best business consultants. And then we all came in and presented these huge ideas of how we're going to do complete transformation of the industry and the business. And the CEO was fantastic, but really ripped a lot of those presentations apart. And that was one of the best learning experiences. You saw from everyone in the classroom, not only did the engagement skyrocket,
right,
but the appreciation for going through that learning experience, what that helped people think through about what pathway they were on and what they wanted to do. It sort of altered some people's thinking about the future pathway. And more importantly, there was one of our colleagues, she got hired right at that class. Boom. She not only won and had the best presentation, which was interesting. It was incremental improvement. In this case, it wasn't this massive pie in the sky, which was interesting for all of us to sort of discover. And she got hired right there. And that's when the light bulb went off for us. Why aren't more classes like this? Why do we have to wait till our last semester to go through this kind of experience?
Right.
And how much better off? We do so many projects in school, but most of them are fictitious. They're like that case study. They're out of a textbook. They're designed by a faculty member. There's no real engagement with a real employer. How much better off would both sides be if this effort that we're putting into learning could create a co-learning experience and actually could help support small businesses and community organizations solve real challenges in their community and around the world, and could lead to these kinds of employment outcomes like we saw for our colleague.
That's a great intro to this whole conversation because, full disclosure, we're doing some work for you guys, and we're actually talking to a lot of employers, a lot of institutional leaders on the higher ed side. And then I've had opportunities to talk to a lot of other companies in the experiential learning space, and it feels to me like I bet that student experience you're talking about, that is probably what you get to see over and over and over again with the product that you've built. I mean, that's got to be exciting.
It's unbelievably rewarding. We have this thing on Riipen called the Wall of Love. For anyone who wants to check it out, it's on our website. You can check it out, riipen.com/love. But it's just this stream of testimonials, written, video, audio from students, from employers, from faculty members and educators, and even staff members, practitioners in this space who go through that exact same light bulb moment. Holy cow, I didn't realize I could be teaching my course this way. I could get this level of engagement, and my students could be out there solving real problems, making a real impact out there in that community. And we could be tracking that and measuring that and better understanding how to, get that feedback loop to better understand how to prepare my students for these kinds of problems as the world keeps shifting faster and faster. Students having these light bulb moments of, wow, I really thought I was on this track to enter into this career, but then that exposure from that project, I'm so glad I got that early on in my second year, because now I'm thinking I might make this shift. I'm drawn into this other area. Or, folks who, let's be honest, I think a big reason for this this moment where experiential learning is becoming as big as it is today, is so many students out there really struggling to get that internship, to get that co-op opportunity, to get the
Right.
full-time job post-graduation. And these experiences giving them not just the experience itself, not just the skills that, get actually verified and validated by the employers. I'm sure we'll get into all that kind of stuff and build up their portfolio, but it's the social capital. It's someone that I now am connected through in their network. I can see who they're connected to, and I can ask them for support and connecting me to someone. We all know how many jobs are found through the hidden job market, and so those aha moments, yeah, they're pouring in, and it's not just the data behind it, but it's the stories that surface from this that are goal, and what our partners and our employers and our students are trying to create for these experiences.
It's interesting to think about Ripen in terms of who your customer really even is. I mean, I immediately was like, oh, okay, higher ed. And certainly there are experiential learning providers that have a model that might rely on higher ed students, but they actually are serving the employer more. Can you talk about like who is your customer, and then talk a little bit more about like how that's evolved over time, because it feels like it ought to just be a two-sided marketplace, employer, institution. But I feel like you've got a lot more plates going on out there. So maybe unpack a little bit of that for us.
Yeah, so the evolution is really interesting and exciting. It depends how far you want to go back, but might be really interesting for the audience here. We really do think of this as a three-sided marketplace. You got your learners, you got your educators, your academic institutions, and your employers. So our primary customers are the education or training organizations that we work with, because we work with higher ed, but we also work with boot camps. We work with sector councils, economic development agencies, any sort of training organization that might be offering short cycle training for reskilling, upskilling. We're augmenting that learning with real world application in the same way that we do it in the classroom. We're just doing it in a more intensive training a program. And then, of course, so those are our customers. And when I say customers, those are the ones that are obviously we have the commercial relationship with. Really, that is typically with the provost office at an academic institution, or the dean's office if we're working with an individual business school, faculty of engineering, or what have you. That is the most common case, but there's lots of different offices that we'll often work with at an institution. It really sort of depends where you're getting that entrepreneurial mindset. You have the ability to move and be agile, and the authority and the budget to take something like this on. So it does sort of shift. The interesting thing, if you think about our evolution, is that when we first started, we were actually primarily charging businesses. So businesses were coming to us and they were paying per project. We were giving it away to faculty members, individual faculty members, for free. And then once we had And so basically, the businesses were kind of paying for our free pilots for faculty members. Once we had 3 or 4 or 5 faculty members at an institution using it, seeing the value from it, and starting to measure some of that impact, then we would be able to go to the dean and say, hey, look, let's start to institutionalize this. Let's build a whole roadmap and a plan to get more faculty members on board, to get you sort of your administrative view into the experience that they're having on campus, that feedback loop, so you can better understand where this is happening and how well your students are doing out there, and how we might support you in adapting programming to better set students up for success post graduation. And that was going really, really well. The one thing I think that we started to really notice with that model, though, which is interesting, is that when we were charging the companies in this model, it was what you created was this environment of it being quite transactional. Businesses wanted to pay for a work product, so it was very much less about the learning experience. What we started to learn over time is that as we grew that and as we scaled that, and more businesses were coming for the work product, it was putting a lot of pressure on faculty members and their courses and the students to deliver on that work product, which didn't always align with the learning objectives of that course. And so we give a lot of thought to that. And what we realized is that if we actually removed the paywall on the employer side, not permanently, but to remove it for now and allowed that side to just completely scale up, then what we could do is continue to monetize on the academic side, but really ensure that we're getting the right employers in who really believe in creating a high impact, high quality learning experience, and really believe in aligning their project-based experience with the learning objectives of the program. So creating a co-learning experience. And that was just a massive unlock for us. One, obviously, we 10x'd. We're now over 50,000 employers on our marketplace. We've got anywhere from 3,000 to as high as 8,000 projects at any given time, and they're flowing through the marketplace very quickly. And so that sort of made the project side of the ecosystem abundant. It's no longer a scarce resource. There's more than enough projects for all of our programs. And of course, we can continue to grow that. And we could really focus on creating high quality experiences where we could really support the students getting the most out of it. And really give confidence to our academic institutions that when they're going on to our platform and selecting these employers, they know that the employers are there for the right reasons. That was like a huge unlock for us. But it sort of shifted our thinking. Well, rather than going to individual faculty members and starting to add 1, 2, 3, or 4 faculty members and then going to the dean's office, it really became this new go-to-market partnership motion where we would work with senior leadership and start to figure out, where is this happening on campus? How are you doing this today? Most cases you'd hear from leaders, I know this is happening, but I just don't really know where. I know my students are getting this experience. Some faculty members are doing it. They're doing it with their own connections. Some of it's being facilitated through these capstone programs. Some faculty members are going rogue, and I just don't really know what they're doing. But I know there's real world experiences there, but I have no idea how well our students are doing. I don't know, are they representing our brand well out there? What do employers think about these experiences? I don't have any track record of all these employers. I know employers that are working with our business school could also be interested in working with our faculty of engineering. And so it really became this model of how do we create the infrastructure and work with senior leadership to design a plan of how we were going to track all these types of experiences happening across campus, how we're going to measure the impact on those, and how we were going to facilitate bringing on more and more faculty members and creating more avenues for more students to get access to these experiences. And then, as you know, what's been really interesting is that while the faculty-driven model has continued to be our solid foundation that we really build upon, more and more institutions are asking us for, how do you do this in a co-curricular capacity? How could we create a structured program where we could get our student clubs involved? Or we could build it through the Career Services Center. How could we create these internship 4-credit courses, which we could scale up to 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 students and really build some economies of scale and some quality controls and really measure the impact and build even more evidence to help track even more faculty members to come on board.
You're hitting on something that is really fascinating. The first thing is I've been in the market for 20 years, and whenever I've seen a 3-sided market scenario, the laggard is always the higher ed institution. Every time, doesn't matter what you're selling, what your product set is. It's because higher ed is just slower at adopting, um, slower to responding. It's not a criticism. It's just a reality of a larger, more complex institution. And the but when you and I first spoke and you told me about the ecosystem in Canada, right? Like when I first kind of heard about it in that context, it it was clear to me that you guys had gotten to that level where you had enough equilibrium across all three sides, employer, student, institution, that greater uh, change could occur at the higher ed institution level, right, as well as the student level. And so, what I guess what my question about that is what what was the turning point that got senior leadership at the university level to not just go, yeah, I see all this happening, but to say this needs to be a part of my strategy? Like, was it, and was there a moment that you can recall this started happening more and more? I'm just curious, like, what was that inflection point at the institution?
It's a great question. In the early days when we first started this, the concept of work integrated learning, work-based learning, and it wasn't what it was today. And even if you did talk about it, people were really just talking about co-ops, internships, and apprenticeships. So there was no sort of continuum of flexible, innovative approaches to work integrated learning and experiential learning, like what we really focus on here at Riipen. And so when we were going into institutions, you're exactly right. We were building our business up by winning the hearts and minds of individual faculty members who were champions, who believe in this. Some of them were already doing it and felt alone, felt like they were working really hard and maybe not necessarily getting recognized for it, and spending a lot of energy putting effort into this because they believe in this was the better way to teach for their students. Many of them wanted to do this. Maybe they saw another faculty member doing this, or they heard of it and they went, wow, that was amazing. They heard the stories, but they just looked at it and went, well, where am I going to find the connections? Where am I going to find how am I going to design this and ensure that my students have a high quality experience? And so we were really winning the hearts and the minds of the educators, the faculty members, the department chairs, the associate deans who really believed in this and were trying to, really build a stronger case from this. And slowly but surely, we would really grow from there. It's interesting to talk about Canada of when there's probably a lot of things that moved into the that really got senior leadership thinking about this, and there's increasingly, as the space evolves, even more. But I would say the first thing that really came around was tracking. Folks knew this was happening. It started to become more and more clear that this was happening in institutions. It started to become more clear that students were demanding this. This is not just a Canadian thing. This is a U.S. thing, and this is not just a recent thing, but it's been certainly increasing very quickly. The students were demanding this. They were hearing from enrollment offices, whether they're attracting international students or whether they're tracking domestic students, that students want real world work experience throughout their education pathway. And if they could better track and measure it, then they could make stronger cases publicly that if you come here, you will get access to these experiences. And then they started to really want to measure it, understand how well are we doing in this, and then use that as a way as a key differentiator. Come to our institution. If you're at our institution, you'll get access to these kinds of experiences that will lead to this kind of impact. And that's when you start to layer in the stories. This student works with this company, that taking this course solved this challenge, and then that led to this job. And that's like a really powerful message for attracting enrollment. And then something really interesting started to happen that was kind of at the same time. So one thing that's interesting about our work, as you know, there's sort of a fourth member in the marketplace, not to overcomplicate it, but that's government. And in Canada, we very quickly started working with provincial and federal government. They started seeing the value of these experiences. The research coming out on high impact practices like this was very clear. It's a huge opportunity cost. You're taking a huge percentage of the population, 18 to 24-year-old, 25-year-old, you're putting them in post-secondary where they're not really working, and that better pay off. that better lead to these individuals. First of all, then there's an opportunity cost because they're not working while they're in school. So how can you solve for that opportunity cost? How can you make ways for them to contribute to the economy, contribute to society, have a positive impact while they're still in school? That's like a huge win for folks thinking about the ROI of investments in higher education, government in particular. And then how do you ensure that once they graduate, they're going to land a meaningful employment, they can contribute to their communities, they can contribute to the economy, they can help organizations grow and create more jobs and more opportunity and live fulfilling lives. And so that became a huge focus really for government. And in Canada, you might be surprised to hear this, but many provinces started moving into performance-based funding. And so not only did they say that you need to start doing this and encouraged you to start doing this, but they said, we're going to start measuring you all on this. And those of you who provide the better results and are reaching more students will actually get more funding. And that really lit the fire, where leaders were very focused on and have continued to be extremely focused on this. And we're starting to see, pockets of that really sort of pop up in the US as well.
You're heading right where I was thinking. So I want to go back to maybe in my history, performance-based funding in the US was around completion. It was completion of a degree or certificate. And we saw it pop up in Florida and Ohio first. And when that happened, everybody jumped on it and was like, this is terrible. You can't do this. You're going to make the funding based on things outside of institutional control. But it quickly became normalized. And I think what's interesting, when I was surprised to hear that Canada went to this kind of model, but then not surprised, because what we kept hearing after the initial rollout of like performance-based funding around just completion of degrees, in particular in our 2-year system in the US, we kept hearing the drumbeat at the legislative level in certain states. Hey, look, we can't be the state that has the lowest completion rates. Right? And now where that whole thing is coming back full circle again isn't just on completion. Completion's not enough, right? It's really more about like, what are we doing to upskill and get people into better jobs? And then what's the barometer for success there? I'm curious if in the performance-based funding model in Canada, have they arrived at something beyond completion of the degree, and they're pointing to very specific metrics around employability? And what does that look like? What are they tracking?
Yeah, there's several metrics that focus on employability, but in particular, that's like super direct. Is they're tracking institutions on the number of students who are getting access to work and degree learning experiences. And there's something I should really point out, because the research is there. So in Canada, very powerful. Waterloo is an example, huge leader globally in research around work integrated learning. The research is there. So now let's make sure that we're delivering these high quality experiences, and then of course let's start to measure it post program. I should also mention one other thing that's interesting, what the government of Canada did, that we've been heavily involved in, is there was sort of a carrot and a stick. If you call performance-based funding the stick, I mean, you might also call it a bit of the carrot. There was also carrots. So there was funding created for capacity building that went to the institutions to create new and innovative programming, and adopt new technologies and work with new intermediaries that would allow them to scale up high quality, high impact work integrated learning, and to do that in a way that would become self-sustaining long term. So we have some really strong, successful case studies. We've also done this with philanthropic organizations. We've also done this in the US as well, where government or philanthropy will fund an institution to get started on a platform like ours, start to deliver high quality, high impact work integrated learning, and then start to build evidence and scale and economies of scale, and show and demonstrate how this can become more increasingly cost effective as it continues to grow. And then as the funding dries up, the schools take that on because they see the value. The ROI is clearly there, and they can continue sustaining this long term. That's a model that has worked really well in Canada. We've brought that to the US. We've done a number of consortiums where we brought in multiple cohorts of institutions. It really just solves that first dollar in problem. I think one of the reasons why higher ed moves so quickly is there's so many faculty, there's so many committees, there's so much review. Let's really make sure we have evidence before we get started. The challenge, of course, is in a newer category, you need to get started before you can get the evidence. And so these sort of funding capacity building programs can remove that friction, get started, build the evidence, then start sustaining it post program. But also, as well as capacity building, the government of Canada and provincial governments have also created incentives for employers because they realize we could transform higher education as much as we like, but if we don't solve the supply problem, if we don't create incentives for more employers to come participate, then we're just going to widen the chasm of the supply and demand problem, which we all know is needs to be a problem. So these incentives would encourage employers to bring on students for a internship or co-op and offer a wage subsidy to cover a portion of the wages to encourage more employers to come on board. And then once the employers come on board and hire a student, have a successful experience with them, they start to become employers who don't necessarily need that wage subsidy anymore because they realize the value of bringing the students on board. At Riipen, what was really interesting is that we went to the government of Canada and pitched them on this whole concept where we said, look, we love the model where you're offering wage subsidies, but a lot of the companies that we work with who are doing these project-based experiences, they don't have the time, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the connections. When you're asking them to go find the student, apply, fill out all the paperwork, get the student approved, get them onto payroll, submit the pay stubs, do all the reporting back to the government, then to get reimbursed. Most of these small businesses where you could really move the needle on the supply and demand challenge, get more investment from businesses, they just pull out. It's just too much work. And so we came in and said, what if we took all that on? What if we were the employer of record? What if we had an independent contractor relationship with the students? What if we handled all of the paperwork, all of the reporting back to the government, and we managed all of that? And all of a sudden, the government loved it. We could bring that into a $5,000 subsidy, into a $1,000 stipend. The money could go 5 times as far, reaching 5 times as many students, 5 times as many employers. The ROI skyrockets it, but then more importantly, you're reaching the employers, and the evidence on our end is also reaching the students who face the biggest barriers, who wouldn't have otherwise participated. So now you're really moving the needle. It's not sending employer incentives to employers who would have hired students anyway. It's sending employer incentives to employers who wouldn't have otherwise come to the table. We're really starting to move the needle on that. So that's what I think was just so interesting about our space. And that's not unique to Canada. We are seeing programs like that around the world. We are seeing pockets in the US where you have these capacity building funding programs, where you have these employer incentive programs. Yes, many of them still have a lot of problems, a lot of challenges. There's still a lot of paperwork. There's still a lot of friction. They're still not adopting technology and infrastructure to do it in a scalable, network effect a way where everyone is better off in every case. But there's a lot of transformation happening in that space, and that's a world that we believe we can play in.
That's exciting. On the Canada to US transition, there's something else that I've noticed with Riipen that's really interesting, and it's that no disrespect to the majority of companies that come in our and struggle in the U.S. market, because the U.S. market is very different than a Commonwealth market, right? I mean, the way your universities are structured, the way you can get things done, very different in Canada. So I expect fully that when you're coming into the U.S., you immediately hit some headwinds just through the diversity of what we call segments in higher ed, right? I mean, you've just got every different type of university. They all look like they're a similar institution, but they're funded differently, or they've got different types of challenges, highly selective and otherwise. So I'm calling this out because I've seen you move in very methodically, seeming to understand the U.S. market and are thoughtfully putting things in place in different segments of the market. I'm just curious, like, how did you Was this a trial and error thing that happened over a period of years?
So great question. So I mean, one thing I will just say is that right from the get go with Riipen, when we are working, because we built a model to empower individual faculty members to transform their courses into work integrated learning courses, and that's sort of the core and the foundation of our work. And then, of course, we build programmatic programming out of the provost office and dean's office around that every student can get access to. Um, that required an enormous amount of flexibility, winning the hearts and minds of faculty members to be invited into their courses, to invite employers in, to be part of the learning journey of those students and to co-learn alongside them and to create these high quality, high impact learning experiences that are going to lead to better employment outcomes, but also develop more socially engaged students with the durable skills that are so core to the purpose of higher education. That's a big deal. And so we had to put them in the driver's seat. We really had to offer, of course, best practices and offer templates and offer guidance and training and support. And the most important and very importantly, the technology that can augment what they're doing and really support them. But at the end of the day, we had to learn, from them, how do you want to design this? How is this going to align with the learning objectives of your program, the way that you want to set up this experience for your students? And so that just became part of our culture from day one. We are going to flex. We are going to build all these different ways that you can configure our platform, all these different ways that you can configure these experiences and configure the way that we would support you as an individual. And we would work with every institution, recognizing that those institutions are unique. The students that they serve are unique. The faculty members are unique, and the culture at that institution is unique, and the employers and their community around them, both local and employers that would be attracted to working with them, are unique. And so that strategy just worked really well for us to be able to work with a small rural college that is trying to that doesn't have a large employer network in their local community, that's trying to break into other geographies and try to bring more industry to recognize that there's a unique opportunity to potentially even invest more in this community, or whether we're working with a large R-run institution who is super high profile, wants very structured, very high volume, local, has already tons of connections with industry and just needs a better way to manage them and support and track and measure that. It really, that sort of, we built that culture right from day one. Is how do you flex? How do you really how do you provide guidance? How do you provide best practices? How do you connect academic institutions to other academic institutions, faculty members and practitioners to other faculty members and practitioners from other institutions, so they can really get a sense of what's really working? All happens through our marketplace, through our ecosystem, through our network. But then really, how do we design this around their unique needs, while ensuring that they adopt the practices that we know they're going to lead to the best outcomes?
There's a level of, I don't know, call it modularity or scalability to the way you describe an implementation in the higher ed space. That's really compelling, given the fact that higher ed institutions are so diverse in their teaching styles and the different types of programs they deliver and the number of students that are involved. And the thing that's also kind of maybe at this point concerning is just that we're not moving quick enough in the US to address experiential learning. What we're doing is we're adopting it in highly siloed ways, right? So it feels to me like a Riipen can come in and establish a broader view across the academic enterprise, and provide new levels of insights to an institution. But talk about the challenges of being an enterprise solution in an experiential market that is largely point solutions, right? Like, I mean, it's no disrespect. Most solutions are doing their thing really well in a very segmented area of the the enterprise, and you've got this sort of longer view. Talk a little bit about what the challenges are like in that world for Riipen.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting concept and challenge. The uh, and this starts just with your the career management systems and even the job platforms and the whole career management system space, experiential space, really lacks interoperability standards and the ability for these systems to integrate. We work with a partner who often calls this the petting zoo. There's in our career services, there's like 12, 15, 25 different technologies, and none of them talk to each other. And wouldn't we be much better off if the experiences that you were getting in the classroom, the skills that were attached to those experiences that ended up on your portfolio on Riipen, then ended up in your portfolio on your career management system when you're applying for jobs, and then the same thing can be used to attract and match you to the right mentor based on those skills and based on those skills gap. And that was also attached to the labor market information. And unfortunately, like that, there's a lot of work going into moving in that direction. But there's still a ton of work left to do, and we're a big part of that movement, and we're really proud to be a big part of that movement. And a lot of institutions really putting their foot down and saying, look, we want our tools to start integrating much more closely together and demanding that of their tools. That's the only way it's really going to happen. Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that all these different, it's unsurprising, right, that there's all these different point solutions, because institutions are unique. Meeting learners where they are at the unique, the unique learner and their unique needs where they are in their education pathway requires different solutions at different times. So you might think about the micro internship, which is a paid, short, flexible internship that can be done asynchronously and remote. You can think about the managed internship, which is you may have a large employer who is looking to grow their internship program, but really wants to actually outsource the management of that internship program to an intermediary who specializes in managing internship programs for larger corporate partners. You've got your simulated internships, which are taking typically a real life work experience internship, simulating it so the students are actually going through that project or that simulation or that work experience, so it feels like a real work experience, and then really learning from that and then being able to apply that to maybe a higher intensity one. You got curricular, co-curricular, the list goes on. And the reason why there's so many different point solutions across all of these different systems is because there's so many unique needs. There's so many different types of institutions. There's so many different learners. There's so many different applications. But if we're really thinking about this, I think the biggest mistake any institution can do is think that it's an either or. Oh, well, we're only going to focus on internships. Oh, we're only going to focus on co-op. That's what we're going to do. Oh, we're only going to focus on the curricular internships. So this, really what we're talking about, the world needs, society needs, our education institutions need to do is think about the full continuum. How do we reach students early on when they first start with low intensity experiences that are going to help prepare them, help build them confidence, help them get set up for the next stage, and slowly offer increasingly more dosage, scaffold the intensity of those experiences over time, so they can get more exposure, so they can really understand and get career clarity on what pathway they really want to take. So they don't waste time taking courses and taking programs that aren't going to align with their career interests. They can build these professional connections and social capital along the way. They can build these portfolios and these badges and these artifacts that are going to help signal to employers that they have these experiences, that are going to create the feedback loops back to the institution. It helps them go, oh, wow, okay, this is what our students are learning. This is what employers are saying about them. Wow, here's how we might adapt our programming to really make sure that we set students up for success. That's the future that we really believe in, is that multiple different types of experiences are all part of the education pathway. And we're really building the infrastructure to enable that. Many of those types of experiences are offered by us. We have our own versions of doing that. Many of those we actually partner with other organizations and deliver them through our platform. But because we're a marketplace and an ecosystem, we have this massive network of employers that we can really, which is often one big part of the cost, we can reduce that cost and really help an institution create economies of scale across uh, um, the entire continuum.
No, I think that's great. And it's a wonderful vision for where we need to go um, here in the US. I think we're going to get there. And I think that I think we're actually kind of moving towards a glide path as opposed to it being just this big fractionalized market. But um, in closing on this, you've been talking to a lot of senior leadership universities across the US. Um, what do you think is the the kind of a best practice for senior leaders based on what others are doing that would really allow a new university who's thinking about taking experiential learning to the next level? What's the best practice, or where's a place to start at a new university? What should they be thinking about, and based on what you're hearing in the market?
I think you really want to start this. What we've really seen the best examples. This really starts from the top. This has, the more that an institution can get this woven into their strategic mandate, can get this woven into, here's how we're going to be demonstrating to our accrediting bodies for accreditation, what more they can be. This can be woven into their agreements with for funding if they're publicly funded, and that starts to become just part of the culture. This is the type of experience that we want to create. This is being publicly messaging this out. Start to think through systems. So we work with an institution recently who, or we're working with an institution right now who is starting to label every single one of their courses. Is this an experiential learning course? And if so, at what authenticity level and at what intensity level, so that students can start to understand, well, I'm choosing an experiential learning course or I'm not choosing an experiential learning course. They're also doing that for AI, probably not surprising. Is AI required? Is it recommended, or is it not allowed? And that helps students sort of make better decisions. And of course, that becomes part of the culture. And you start to see the students are voting with their feet. And as more and more students start to go towards the experiential courses and the courses that are leveraging experiential and AI, and really doing some amazing things, then that starts to create the culture that individuals are going to be rewarded by investing more of their time and their energy in these experiences. It's more than just the culture, though. I think what's really been successful in Canada is the practitioners. In every institution now in Canada, you've got work integrated learning offices that typically report into the provost office, chief academic officer's office, and they're really focused on bridging the gap from what was career services and doing traditional internships and career preparation in academia. And how do we bring that into the classroom? How do we ensure that that's built all the way through? But then how do we break down more silos? How do we get alumni involved? Because we want to be attracting more alumni, especially if they're alumni who did projects while they're in class. Then they go off and join companies. Let's bring those alumni back to offer projects to the next generation. How do we bring this as part of our GR strategy, and how we're engaging with the local economic development agency and the local chamber, start to build talent pipelines to help them attract businesses to the local region, like really starting to shape what that story actually looks like, and having a complete way of measuring, tracking, facilitating, and sort of convening folks in the community of the institution to tell the story and to push this whole thing forward.
I feel like for the first time, this is something that's very attainable, and there's a reform happening in higher ed, and I feel like experiential learning is right in the middle of it. I think there's a lot of things going on, but I think experiential learning and work-based learning are just so key. It's exciting to see this. I feel like we're going to have another round too, because I know that there'll be a lot of new things to talk about even like 6 months from now. So we've got the conversation going, but thank you so much for doing this and for taking the time with me today.
Thank you for having us. It's a super exciting time. Heard someone say recently, if there was ever something, often talk about product market fit in tech, but there's ever a product moment fit, this really feels like it. There's just an enormous amount of energy And it's just exciting to see the folks and what they're coming up with. I mean, some of the best ideas on our platforms and the delivery of experience on our platforms, they're not coming from us anymore. They're coming from our partners, to call them innovation partners. And so thank you for having us here. We just love getting the chance to talk about our partners. And if anyone out there is interested in learning more, please reach out.